Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. This is a short presentation of the very short-lived movement known as the Harlem Renaissance to accompany your studying of Zora Neale Hurston's short story Sweat. Now, the second decade of the 20th century, America was not only about the Great Gatsby's glamorous wild champagne and oysters, parties, bootlegging, and jazz music. And it wasn't about Babbitt's futile attempts to be himself in an age that dictated duties of consumerism and standardization. The jazz age was also of the Black American. Sharing on the prosperity of the nation after World War I, many blacks migrated away from the terrible South that was characterized by its bitter legacy of segregation and slavery to New York City. They relocated in an excellently sited district, Harlem, that boasted the finest housing stock that blacks had ever been allowed to inhabit. As a natural response to this new social and economic status, African Americans assumed a new confidence in themselves and in their abilities. This was extensively reflected in magazines, newspapers, on the stage, in nightclubs, and in literature and music in a way that had virtually never happened before. A new generation of black artists emerged to find their voice, their plays, and their own selves, giving birth to the literary and cultural phenomenon popularly known as the Harlem Renaissance. With the publication of Alan Locke's showcase anthology The New Negro in 1925, the movement's literature, music, and art were finally catalogued and documented. The aim of this scholar, who was a Howard University sociology professor, was to construct a, and I quote, transformed and transforming psychology of a new type of African American so as to encourage the development of a more positive self-respect and self-reliance and race pride. In Locke's view, the real significance of the manifesto, apart from emphasizing black achievements in the arts, rested in its claim to open the canon. With the book The New Negro, Locke craved to show America seeking a new spiritual expansion and artistic maturity, trying to found an American literature, a national art, which implied a Negro American culture seeking the same satisfactions and objectives. However different the skin color, the material, that is, Locke adds, the Negro culture is an integral part of the age and cultural setting. Needless to say, at the time, Negro was the word that they used, that African Americans used to refer to themselves, and this is in the context of the deep segregation still enforced in the South of the country. So the body of work produced by the younger group of the Harlem Renaissance movement, with figures such as Countee Cullen, Langston Hughes, that we're going to be talking about, Sterling A. Brown, or Zora Neale Hurston. Again, we're going to be talking about her and reading her short story Sweat, and several others, is contrastingly different from that of their predecessors. It involved a revolt against the only type of poetry that black artists were, quote unquote, allowed to produce, the so-called, again, Negro dialect poetry. It also rose against the typical stereotypes of blacks: the mammy, the pickaninny, the Jezebel, the happy-go-lucky, and the thief, among others. And it finally opposed sentimental moods. This younger generation of poets attempted to express their feelings of disillusionment and bitterness. Out of it, there came poetry of protest, rebellion, and despair, as we shall see momentarily. The group also revolted against the race problem poetry. Although the Harlem Renaissance group did not succeed in dismissing the race subject matter altogether, many of them did find a new, subtler approach to it, which shows in the ultimate effectiveness of their poetry. These young African Americans desired to be simply poets, with all the term means, of course, while letting the world know that they were black poets proud of themselves and their people. In the 1926 manifesto, the Negro artist and the racial mountain that has now become a milestone for genuinely African American art, Langston Hughes, the poet, exhorts black artists, and I quote, to change through the force of his art that old whispering, I want to be white, hidden in the aspirations of his people to, why should I want to be white? I am a Negro and I am beautiful, unquote. This very same spirit is the one that renders the younger poet's verse unique. Now, Langston Hughes was born at the turn of the century and won national recognition in the 1920s. Before he was 21, Hughes had already experienced a variety of hardships working as a flower delivery boy, in New York, a cabaret doorman, a second cook in Paris, a deck painter on a European steamer, and a tourist in the Mexican wilderness. This experience, together with his strong love for reading and his Lincoln University studies, made him speak to and for the black everyman, the black common man. Hughes' magnificence rests in his unbound free verse and experimentation with American rhythms, like ragtime or spirituals, in a variety of dialectal voices and in a conclusively perfected Whitmanesque style. Langston Hughes' rebellious spirit, both in subject matter and form, is laid bare in this poem, Good Morning Revolution, that may give us a taste of some of the poetry of the Harlem Renaissance. Good morning, revolution. You are the very best friend I ever had. We're gonna pal around together from now on. Say, listen, revolution. You know, the boss where I used to work, the guy that gave me the air to cut down expenses, he wrote a long letter to the papers about you. Said you was a troublemaker, an alien enemy. In other words, a son of a bitch. He called up the police and told them to watch out for a guy named Revolution. You see, the boss knows you are my friend. He sees us hanging out together. He knows we're hungry and ragged and ain't got a damn thing in this world and are gonna do something about it. The boss has got all he needs, certainly. Eats well, owns a lot of houses, goes vacationing, breaks strikes, runs politics, bribes police, pays off Congress, and struts all over the earth. But me, I ain't never had enough to eat. Me, I ain't been warm in winter. Me, I ain't never known security. and my life been living hand to mouth, hand to mouth. Listen, revolution, we are buddies. See, together we can take everything. Factories, arsenals, houses, ships, railroads, forests, fields, orchards, bus lines, telegraphs, radios. Jesus, raise hell with radios, steel mills, coal mines, oil wells, gas, all the tools of production. Great day in the morning, everything, and turn them over to the people who work. Rule and run them for us people who work. Boy, them radios, broadcasting that very first morning to USSR. Another member the International Soviets done come. Greetings to the Socialist Soviet Republics. Hey, you rising workers everywhere, greetings. And we'll sign it, Germany. Sign it, China. Sign it, Africa. Sign it, Poland. Sign it, Italy. Sign it, America. Sign it with one name, worker. On that day when no one will be hungry, cold, oppressed anywhere in the world again. That's our job. I've been starving too long. Ain't you? Let's go, revolution. Flowing like street chart, grooving with folk rhythm, bursting with catalogs, bravado, and sardonic undertones, his individual technique in this poem, in Langston Hughes' poem, is worth praising. Say, and I quote, say, listen, revolution, you know the boss where I used to work said you was a troublemaker, an alien enemy, in other words, a son of a bitch. This alien enemy is a clear metaphor for the African American himself and his desires for self-respect, which were clearly not welcomed by bosses, since the poetic character was fired for having a revolutionary spirit. The poetic's voice experience with revolutionary activity is no more than an overt summoning of the African American to stand on top of the racial mountain and be free within ourselves, as Hughes put it. Moreover, in the last lines, the poetic voice calls the black worker with a socialist undertone to act upon the prevailing situation, to take everything and turn them over to the people who work. The final lines of the verse are the triggers to act. I've been starving too long. Ain't you? Let's go, revolution. Whitmanesque, both in style and spirit, it is most significant that Hughes should equate himself with the most American of American writers. Now, on to our main topic coming up. Zora Neale Hurston, who was born in 1891 and died in 1960, was an author, an anthropologist, and filmmaker who was born in Alabama in the deep American South. And in her work, she portrayed racial struggles in the early 20th century. Beyond the Harlem Renaissance, her achievements went unnoticed until the 1970s and 80s, when new trends in criticism revitalized her body of work. In the short story Sweat, she presents the character of Delia, a woman who dares to stand up to her husband Sykes and fight against his constant domestic abuse. The main themes of the story are Christianity, domestic abuse, race and class, and hard work. Now, if you think about the Harlem Renaissance, these artists at large showed mastery to break with their predecessors' archetypes, forms, tone, and matter, and they created highly experimental, melodic, intellectual, self-reliant, and organic poetry, drama, and prose. Their movement, although short-lived, as I said, was later taken up by many other great African American authors throughout the 20th century, and it is a legacy that is still pretty much alive.